Here's our data set. We have a column for the order ID, the customer name, the zip code of the customer, the date which the order was placed by the customer, the date when the order was shipped by Rob, the color of the table, the size of the table, how much the customer paid for the table, and how much Rob paid to make the table. We'll need to create 2 new columns of data before we proceed with the analysis. The first one will be for the process time, or how long did it take from when the order was placed to when it was shipped. To find that, we'll type the equal sign and look at the difference between the ship date minus the order date. Click Enter. So in this first row of data, we can see that the order was placed on January 5th, and then 14 days later, the order was shipped on January 19th. Let's copy this formula down. Hover your mouse over the bottom right-hand corner until the black plus sign appears, and then double-click. And it's automatically copied down to each of the records. The other column we want to create is gross profit. To calculate gross profit, we'll take our sales revenue and subtract out the costs that Rob had to pay. This calculates any leftover money that Rob gets to pocket after he pays for his own costs. So in this first case, the customer paid $405 for the table. Rob had to pay out $160 to make the table, so he gets to keep, or he profits, $245. We'll also copy this down to each record using the same method. Hover your mouse over the bottom right-hand corner and double-click. We're now ready to create the pivot table. Click anywhere in the table of data, click on Insert, and then Pivot Table. Leave everything as default and click OK. I'm going to rename it from Sheet 1 to Pivot Table. The fields I want to take in are ship date to the rows. So notice we're looking at the 5-year period from 2018 to 2022. There's a little bit of data in 2023 because some of the orders were placed in 2022 but haven't shipped until 2023. But really 2018 to 2022 is the main date range we're looking at. And for my values, I want to look at selling price. So drag and drop selling price into the values box. Same thing for process time and gross profit. The default is sum of selling price, sum of process time, and sum of gross profit. For sum of selling price, let's change that to an average selling price. Click on the drop-down arrow next to sum of selling price, then click on Value Field Settings. The default is sum, and let's change that to average. Excel now calculates the average selling price for each of those years. We want to do the same thing for sum of process time. Click on the drop-down arrow next to sum of process time. Click on Value Field Settings, and then change it from sum to average. Click OK, and it does the same thing, changes it to the average process time for each of those years. Or if I expand these years, it breaks it down further into the quarters and even months. Let's take selling price over in the Fields menu and drag it one more time into the Values box and drop it right at the top. We want to look at both sum of selling price as well as average selling price. I'm going to collapse my quarters and years just to condense the view. Let's clean this up a bit. Highlight the data in sum of selling price. Click on the Home tab, and then select the comma under the Number menu. It'll go ahead and add commas to the appropriate spots in the numbers so they're a little easier to read. Let's also reduce the decimal places to make this a whole number. Click on Decrease Decimal twice, and it adjusts that to a whole number. Let's do the same thing for sum of gross profit. Highlight the column of data in sum of gross profit, click on the comma, and decrease the decimal twice. We'll do something similar for average selling price and average process time. Highlight both columns of data, and let's decrease the decimal to 2 decimals. This is an average, and we want to keep some specificity in this, so leaving it at 2 decimals is appropriate. Let's also add a filter to our pivot table. Let's filter the results by size. So take size from the pivot table fields and drag and drop it into filters. The size filter has appeared at the top with a drop-down menu. Click on Select Multiple Items. The default is that all 4 sizes are selected, but we can deselect all of them and filter on 1 or 2 or 3 options. Maybe we just want to look at medium tables. Click OK, and the pivot table automatically adjusts to just medium tables. We can further drill into the data by expanding the years and even the quarter to get a more granular view of what's happening over time. If you double-click a cell, it brings up a new sheet with all the data records that are being used to calculate those values within that specific time period. I double-clicked April 2021, so Excel brought up all the data records that occurred in April of 2021. Let's now make a pivot chart. We're going to make a copy of this pivot table. At the bottom, where the pivot table tab is, right-click the tab, and then select Move or Copy. In the dialog box, select Create Copy, and then click OK. It now creates a duplicate of that pivot table. I'm going to rename it Pivot Chart. Click into the new duplicated pivot table, and then click on the Pivot Table Analyze button. Then select Pivot Chart. We're going to select a line chart. Remember that line charts are often used for time series data, or when our horizontal axis is a series of dates or time periods, which is exactly what we have here. We're going to select the 4th option, Line with Markers. Click on OK. And I'll expand this so it's a little bigger. Let's clean this up. Let's only look at the sum of selling price and sum of gross profit over time. So I'm going to delete out the average selling price. To do that, click on the gray box that says average selling price at the top, then right-click it and select Remove Field. It removes it from the chart. We'll do the same thing for average of process time. Right-click and then select Remove Field. Back over at the pivot table, I'm going to collapse my quarters and years, and notice that it automatically updates on the pivot chart, just so we have a more holistic view. But if a manager wants to dive into that, they certainly can and explore the data in a more granular way. Let's clean up some of the labeling. Instead of sum of selling price, let's change that to something simpler. Click on where the header is, and then type sales revenue. It automatically updates it in the pivot chart. Let's do the same thing for sum of gross profit. Click on C3 and we'll type gross profit. Enter, and it updates in the pivot chart. Notice that our filter is still usable within the chart. So the dropdown is here, and we can filter on 1 or multiple tables, and the results automatically update. Let's move on to the assessment questions. What is the average processing time rounded for a deluxe table in February 2018? So we're looking at a specific table at a specific time period. So let's first filter on the deluxe tables. Then let's filter on the time period, February of 2018. Go ahead and expand 2018 February is in quarter 1, so I'm going to expand quarter 1 and then look to the February row. We want to know what the average processing time was. We can find that in the average processing time column, which was 25 days. What is the total gross profit for the small tables in 2022? Now we're filtering on just the small tables. So I'm going to change my filter from deluxe to small. And the time period we're looking at is 2022. Looking at the 2022 row, the sum of the gross profit was $111,870. Over all years, what is the average amount of time it took to make and ship a medium table? Let's change our filter for the size to medium. The results are now filtered on the medium tables, and we want to know over all the years, 2018 to 2023, what was the average processing time? That would be found in the bottom grand total row of 7.97, or rounded to 8 days. How many sales of medium tables took place in December 2022? We're already filtered on medium tables, so we can leave that as is. We're investigating December 2022. December occurs in quarter 4, so this is the time period I'm interested in. Let's double click on December row to investigate further. Excel now brings up all the data records that occurred in December of 2022. We want to know how many sales of medium tables occurred. Put your cursor in A2, holding the Control and Shift key, click on the down arrow. It'll automatically highlight all the records, and Excel automatically counts the number of records that are highlighted in the bottom green bar of the screen, 297. So, 297 medium tables were sold in December of 2022. Why is there data for 2023? We used ship date in the pivot table, and some orders were placed in 2022 but not shipped until 2023.